All right, in the second lesson of 7.5, we are going to solve inequalities with MDNFing. And what MDNF means, when we see a negative in front of the variable, we are going to flip the inequality at the end. All of that is very important information. So what I mean by that, if I had something like this, the negative is in front of the variable. So when I solve by dividing through by a negative, what I end up doing is flipping my inequality. Okay? Okay. And I also, just to refresh, we have done MDNF one time this year. To refresh your mind what MDNF means, it stands for you multiply. If you, at the end, if you multiply or if you divide at the end by a negative, we flip the inequality. So anytime I say you forgot to MDNF it means you forgot to flip that inequality. Okay? So it says multiply, divide by a negative, flip your inequality. I'm going to do an example. 4x minus 3 is less than 2. Is this something I'm going to need to MDNF? No. Why? It's not negative in front. It says that if we see a negative in front of the variable, I need to do it. And it wasn't in front, the variables or the negatives in back. So I just solved this as normal. I would add 3, so 4x is less than 5. Then I would divide by 4. X is less than, I'm going to leave it improper. I'm just going to say less than 5/4, okay? Just to save time. All right, our next example. Am I going to MDNF this one?
Yes.
Yes, and how can I tell?
There's a negative in front of the variable.
There's a negative right in front of the variable, exactly. If this looks like a negative 2x, there's a negative in front, so that is the important part. So I'm going to solve as normal. How do I move my positive 2?
Subtract.
So I'm going to subtract 2 here and subtract 2 here. I'm left with a minus 2x is bigger than 2. Now I divide through by my negative. I'm dividing through by my negative 2, and I get x is, now I got to MDNF it, less than negative 1. Again, I MDNF'd it because I divided through by a negative. Okay, am I going to MDNF this one?
Yes.
And how do you know?
Because there's a negative.
Because there's a negative to the left. Be specific. I don't want to hear because there's a negative, because if you look at that first example, there is a negative right there that had nothing to do with it. Okay? It needs to be to the left. So there I can tell that I'm going to be MDNFing it. So the first thing I would do is move that 5 by adding. And I get negative 4x is bigger than 12. Now I'm going to divide through by a negative, so I'm going to MDNF it. X is less than a negative 3. This is a concept that proves to trip up 7th graders and 8th graders and 9th graders and 10th graders and college graders all the time. Okay, college graders all the time. Many mistakes are going to come from forgetting to MDNF. So you need to just be very, very, very careful. And anytime at your age that you're dealing with an inequality, I want you to be asking yourself, am I going to MDNF it? Hey, am I going to MDNF this one? No. So the first thing I would do is subtract 8. I get 3x is less than 0. 3 times what is 0?
0.
So x is less than 0. Sometimes we have the very time we see the variable on the right, we want to scoot it to the left. So I just rewrite this whole thing. Negative 2x plus 6. And then I ask myself, what's facing it? The open mouth or the point? What's facing it? Open mouth or point? Open mouth, thank you. The open mouth is facing it. Keep it facing it. And then I'm going to write my other number. Now the next thing I do, I subtract my 6. And I get negative 2x is bigger than a negative 2. That's me subtracting 6. Now I have this negative 2 connected to it, so I have to divide through by a negative 2. So if I divide by a negative, I need to MDNF it. X becomes less than a positive 1. Recalling that if I MDNF, I need to flip that inequality. Those of us that are challenging ourselves, enriching this by making interval notation, it's called. We have a circle at 1 going to the left. That's normal, graphing it on the number line. We have to do that. Now if I wanted to write it in interval notation, it looks like I go from negative infinity first, negative infinity. And I go all the way to 1 and I'm done. And that again is 8th grade notation there. You do not have to feel like you need to master that. Okay, I want you to do 1 with me. We get negative 5 is less than 4 minus 3x. Alright, again, the first thing I want to do, I want my variable on the left-hand side, and I want to just rewrite the whole thing. I say that 4 minus 3x. That's how I write it on the left-hand side. 4 minus 3x. What's facing it, class? Open mouth or point?
Point.
What's facing it? Open mouth is
mouth.
facing it. Is bigger than negative 5. Okay, now I'm going to move my 4. Do I move my 4 by adding or subtracting? I'm going to subtract 4 because this is like a positive 4. To move positive, we subtract. And then I get negative 3x is bigger than negative 9. Now I'm going to divide through by a negative. When I divide by a negative, I MDNF that thing. X is less than a positive 3. Right? Okay, we're going to do another one. Want you to do negative 14 is less than 7x minus 7. Negative 14 is less than 7x minus 7. Okay, looking at this one, we have negative 14 is less than 7x minus 7. I notice my variable is on the right-hand side, so I want to get it to the left. So I rewrite that as 7x minus 7. Open mouth is facing it, keep it facing it, negative 14. The next thing I'm going to do is add 7 to both sides. And I get 7x is bigger than negative 7. Now some of you thought you needed to MDNF this. You do not need to MDNF it because the negative is not sticking to the variable. That's what we care about. We care if it's to the left-hand side of the variable. So we do not need to MDNF that. So I'm just going to divide through by 7. and we get x is bigger than negative 1. Those of you that were testing yourselves, I would have an open circle at 1 going to the right. You would write this in interval notation. You start with negative 1 and you go all the way to what? Infinity and color good.